Rachel sat by the window, staring out at the amber sky as the sun dipped beneath the rooftops. The clock on the wall ticked rhythmically, each second reminding her that David was late. Again. She didn't bother texting him. She already knew the reply. Caught up at work, don't wait up. The house was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No laughter, no soft music, no rustling of newspaper pages like there used to be. Just silence, and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when David would come home early, sneak up behind her, and kiss her neck just to make her giggle. Now, even a glance from him felt like a rare event. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers across the rim of her teacup, her thoughts drifting like smoke. Was this what marriage became? A contract of convenience between two people who merely shared space? When David finally walked in, he looked exhausted. His tie hung loose, and his eyes carried the weight of deadlines rather than desire. He offered a tired smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the table. "Hey," she replied, barely audible. Their conversations had become predictable, rehearsed, like lines from a dull play neither of them had the energy to rewrite. He poured himself a drink and retreated to the couch, phone in hand, already lost in emails and updates. Rachel watched him for a moment longer, hoping he'd look up, maybe ask how her day was. But he didn't. He never did anymore. Later that night, as they lay in bed, his back faced her. She stared at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlight cutting shadows across the room. She reached out hesitantly, fingers grazing his arm, but he didn't stir. With a sigh, she turned away, curling into herself like a secret she no longer wanted to share. The next morning came with routine monotony. Rachel stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair slowly. She wore a soft peach blouse, one David had once said made her glow. But when she walked past him in the kitchen, he didn't even look up from his newspaper. The emptiness gnawed at her. Not just emotional, but physical, a kind of aching absence she couldn't quite explain. Her body remembered what it felt like to be touched, craved the heat of intimacy, but her reality was cold and distant. Later that afternoon, as she stepped out to take the trash down the hallway, she heard the sound of boxes thudding softly against the wall. A moving truck was parked just outside, its back open and half empty. She noticed him then, tall, lean, with dark hair tousled by the breeze. He was lifting a box with one arm, phone balanced against his shoulder, laughing at something someone said. Their eyes met briefly. His smile was instant, casual, but undeniably warm. "New neighbor?" she asked, half to herself, half to him. He glanced over. "Looks like it," he said, setting the box down. "Name's Ethan." "Rachel," she replied, offering a polite nod. "Nice to meet you, Rachel," he said, eyes lingering a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, but there was something in his gaze. Something attentive, curious. The brief encounter left her unsettled in a way she couldn't define. As she returned to her apartment, she found herself looking back over her shoulder just once. That evening, David was home, earlier than usual. But even then, the space between them remained vast. He spoke about work, budgets, and a potential promotion. Rachel nodded, smiled in the right places, but inside, she was somewhere else, somewhere in that hallway, remembering the way Ethan had looked at her like she mattered. That night, for the first time in weeks, she dreamt of a touch that wasn't David's. Rachel found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way Ethan's laughter carried through the hallway. The scent of his cologne, earthy and sharp, lingering faintly in the elevator. The way his voice dipped when he spoke to her, smooth and slow, like warm honey. It wasn't intentional at first. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. A distraction. But distractions have a way of becoming desires when your life is starved of color. A week later, they crossed paths again in the building lobby. Rachel had just returned from grocery shopping, juggling bags in both arms. One slipped, and before it could hit the ground, Ethan caught it effortlessly. "Let me help," he said, taking the rest from her hands without waiting for a response. "I'm fine," she replied, half smiling, half flustered. "Sure you are," he said, grinning. "But I insist." They walked up together, and though the elevator ride was short, the silence between them was thick with unspoken energy. She felt his eyes on her, but he didn't speak. And she didn't look back. Not then. At her door, she turned. "Thanks," she said, taking the bags. "Any time," he replied. Then, before she could go in, he added, "That's a nice blouse, by the way. Peach suits you." Her heart stuttered. It was the same blouse, the one David hadn't noticed. "Thank you," she said a little too softly. The door clicked shut behind her, but her fingers lingered on the knob. Later that evening, Rachel found herself standing in front of her wardrobe longer than usual. She didn't say it aloud, but she wanted to be seen again, to feel visible. She chose a deep burgundy dress she hadn't worn in years, one that hugged her figure in a way that made her feel alive. David barely glanced up from his laptop. "Going somewhere?" he asked flatly. "No," she said, sliding into her seat at the dinner table. "Just felt like dressing up." He nodded and returned to his emails. The meal was silent. That night, sleep evaded her. Her thoughts wandered, circling a question she didn't dare speak aloud. What does it mean when someone who isn't your husband makes you feel more like a woman than he does? The next few days passed in a haze of stolen glances and casual exchanges. Ethan always seemed to be around, getting his mail, taking out the trash, holding the elevator doors. Each encounter was brief, but electric. His compliments were subtle, his tone respectful, but layered with something more, something suggestive. Rachel found herself smiling more. She took longer with her hair, wore lipstick even on casual errands. She told herself it was harmless. She hadn't crossed any lines. Not yet. One afternoon, as she stepped into the elevator, she found Ethan already inside, leaning against the wall. He looked up and smiled. "Lucky me," he said. "Twice in one day." She chuckled, but her voice caught slightly. There was a pause. "You look incredible today," he added, his gaze lingering on her neckline for a second too long. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The doors closed. The silence grew. Then, softly, he asked, "Are you happy?" The question dropped like a stone in water, rippling through the air between them. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and that silence said more than any confession. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. She stepped out without another word. But that night, Rachel stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection as though searching for a version of herself she'd lost somewhere along the way. Her fingers brushed her collarbone where Ethan's gaze had lingered. The heat still burned there. She climbed into bed beside David, who turned off the bedside lamp without a word. The room was dark, quiet, but inside her, something stirred, something reckless and alive, flickering like a flame that had waited too long to be lit. She closed her eyes, knowing she was no longer just lonely. She was on the edge of something dangerous. It began with a knock, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. Rachel stood in the hallway, heart thrumming like a drum beneath her blouse. She hadn't planned to see Ethan today. In fact, she'd told herself to avoid him altogether. But now, he was just outside her door, and her resolve was already crumbling. She opened it slowly. "Hey," he said casually, holding a small box. "I think this belongs to you. It was delivered to my unit by mistake." Rachel's eyes fell on the package. It wasn't hers, and they both knew it. But she took it anyway. "Thanks," she replied, trying to sound composed. He didn't leave. Instead, his eyes traveled over her face, slow, lingering. "You look tired," he said softly. "Didn't sleep much," she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe you just need something different," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. There it was again, the pull. That invisible thread between them, growing tighter with each word, each pause, each breath. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The door clicked shut behind him, locking out the world in a single sound. Inside, the air felt charged. He walked past her, surveying the space like he already belonged there. Rachel followed, unsure whether her steps were driven by desire or denial. Maybe both. She set the package on the table. "You want coffee?" she asked, more out of habit than hospitality. Ethan turned to her, eyes burning with something far less polite. "No," he said. "I didn't come for coffee." Rachel froze. His words hung in the air, bold and unashamed. And then it happened. She turned slightly, intending to walk away, to buy herself a few more seconds of hesitation. But he stepped behind her, close, too close, and placed his hands on her waist. She gasped, body stiffening.
"Ethan," she started.
But he didn't say a word. His hands slid around her hips, fingers tracing the curve she hadn't felt desired for in years. Her breath hitched. Her body betrayed her. She didn't move, not away, not forward. She just stood there, trembling, every nerve alight. His lips hovered near her neck, heat radiating from him like fire. The tension between them shattered into motion as she turned to face him, and their lips met in a kiss that was everything her marriage hadn't been. Urgent, hungry, dangerous. The room spun. Somewhere in the background, a clock ticked mercilessly, counting seconds she could never take back. Their bodies collided, messy, breathless, tangled in desperation. Her heart pounded louder than her guilt. Every caress, every gasp, every stolen second was laced with betrayal. It wasn't love. It wasn't even comfort. It was escape. When it was over, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, hair tousled, blouse wrinkled, pulse still racing. Ethan lay beside her, silent, satisfied, eyes closed like a man who had simply claimed what he wanted. She looked down at her hands, then at the indentation on the sheets. It felt surreal, like waking from a fevered dream only to realize you never left it. "You okay?" Ethan asked, turning his head toward her. She didn't answer. What could she say? That she wasn't sure if she hated herself more for what she'd done or for how alive it made her feel. She stood, gathering her clothes in silence, ignoring the way his gaze trailed her every move. "I should go," she said finally. "You don't have to," he replied. But she was already at the door. Back in her apartment, the world looked exactly the same. The furniture hadn't shifted. The walls hadn't cracked. But something in her had. Later that evening, David returned home. Same keys. Same tired expression. Same lack of attention. Rachel served dinner like she always did. Sat across from him, like she always had. Only now she knew something he didn't. Something that couldn't be undone. He didn't notice the faint redness on her neck. Didn't question her flushed skin or distant eyes. But Rachel noticed. She noticed everything. The silence. The weight of her choices. The ache in her chest that no amount of wine could dull. That night, lying beside her husband, she realized something chilling. Infidelity wasn't just about the act, it was about the void that allowed it to happen. She had crossed a line, yes. But the real betrayal began long before she ever opened that door. And deep down, she knew it wouldn't be the last time.